Well, you had an incredible run of success with the Statler Brothers. Tell us how that all came about.
Well, I had been playing in clubs through Virginia 6 nights a week for a lot of years and playing 4 hours a night. And then I'd have different jobs during the day, sometimes 2, 3 jobs during the day, and actually to pay for my music habit, I called it. But it was Thanksgiving 1981. I was playing at a local ski resort back in Virginia called Wintergreen. I actually was called up there. I was actually off that night. I was called up there to come sit in and jam with some friends of mine the night before Thanksgiving. And when I went up to jam with them that night, Lou DeWitt happened to be there, of the Statler Brothers. He was the tenor singer for the Statler Brothers. I didn't know it at the time, but he suffered from Crohn's disease.
Yeah.
And I had no idea, but he was one of my heroes. And I met him that night because I remember he wrote Flowers on the Wall, and he sang so many of the great hits of the Statler Brothers. And he heard me singing some Roy Orbison songs and things like that. That night we sang together, and I thought, man, this is one of my heroes. I couldn't believe I was meeting him. And so I didn't think I'd hear from him anymore, you know, after we met that night. And then right after Christmas that year, I get a phone call when he was going to need to go in for surgery, going to be out for about 6 months. And then through all that, I was the first name out of his mouth when they were talking about someone to come in and fill in for him.
Was your voice similar to his?
I think it was different, but he was more of a stylist and kind of lilting type tenor singer. But when we sang with the Statler Brothers, was one of the magic things was it blended. Even though we were different singers when we sang solo, which I think he was such a great stylist. He really liked the groups like the Ink Spots and things like that. That's what he grew up on. And of course, I grew up singing in church and things like that. And then and I like the old country music, and you know, like I like the quartets as well. But I also like the Eagles. I grew up on listening to the Eagles. We had bootleg tapes of them before I even knew what they were, who they were. But I was kind of into that kind of vein of music, you know. But I was the first name out of his mouth. And make a long story short, I was called over to audition, and I could not believe it. I mean, I could write a book, and I am writing a book on my life, and that'll have a whole chapter dedicated to it. How I got the call to come over and audition, and eventually got called to Nashville. And when I came to Nashville, we recorded it, and we sat there with Jerry Kennedy, which was their producer at the time. I just walked in right off the street into a studio for my first time in a studio auditioning for the Statler Brothers, and I couldn't believe it. But I also knew in my heart, I said, you know, I can do this, and it was a God thing. I really think it was a God. I know it was a God thing. I was meant to be there. It was all like it was happening, and like it was almost like it already had happened.
God had placed it and put it together.
And my mother's prayers again.
Amen.
Coming to God was protecting me and putting me in the right places, even despite myself, you know.
Yeah.
Because I was baptized, and I came to know about Christ when I was 9 years old. And I was baptized in the Rockfish River up there in Nelson County, right in the river. And then I had what I call the head knowledge, but I didn't really have the heart, you know, knowledge until about 1993 when I was going through a divorce, and my father was diagnosed with cancer, and I'd lost you know, someone that I loved dearly. It was my first loss in life of that magnitude, and with the things I was going through, and I asked Christ to really come into my heart.
So is that when you were saved there in 1993, when your dad had cancer and you were going through
Spring of 1993, on the road with the Statler Brothers, and